Listen before we begin. I want you to take a moment, just a moment, and think about something you've started and didn't finish. Not because you weren't capable, not because you didn't have the time, but because something inside you quietly gave up. We don't like to admit that part, do we? We say we got busy. We say life happened. We say we'll come back to it later. But deep down, we know the truth. Consistency didn't break because of circumstances. It broke because of us. And that's where this conversation begins. Because today is not about motivation. Motivation is cheap. It comes and goes. It's emotional. It's unreliable. What we're talking about today is something far more dangerous. Consistency. The kind that doesn't ask how you feel. The kind that shows up when everything inside you says, not today. The kind that separates people who dream from people who become. And if you're willing to hear it, really hear it, I'm going to share with you 5 ruthless lessons. Not comfortable lessons, not easy ones. But the kind that, if you accept them, will change the way you operate forever. Let's begin. The first lesson is this. Nobody is coming to save you. I know that sounds harsh. But it's the truth most people spend their lives avoiding. We wait. We wait for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right support, the right encouragement. We wait for someone to notice us, to guide us, to push us. We tell ourselves, when things settle down, I'll start. But life doesn't settle down. It doesn't pause and organize itself so you can finally become disciplined. It keeps moving. And while you're waiting, someone else is building. Someone else is showing up. Someone else is becoming the person you said you wanted to be. Consistency begins the moment you stop outsourcing responsibility. The moment you say, it's on me, not my boss, not my family, not my circumstances, me. That shift is uncomfortable because it removes every excuse you've ever used. But it also gives you something powerful. Control. The second lesson is this: you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. We love goals. They feel exciting. They give us direction. I want to get fit. I want to start a business. I want to change my life. But goals don't carry you. Systems do. What you do every single day, especially on the days you don't feel like doing anything, that's what defines you. Consistency is not built in moments of inspiration. It's built in repetition. It's built in boring, unglamorous, invisible work, the kind no one applauds, the kind no one even sees. And here's the part most people don't want to accept. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel inspired. You just need to act over and over again. Because the truth is, consistency is not about intensity. It's about identity. It's about becoming the kind of person who does what they said they would do regardless of how they feel. And that brings me to the third lesson. Discipline is not punishment. It's freedom. We've been taught to think of discipline as something restrictive, something painful, something we have to force ourselves into. But that's not what discipline really is. Discipline is choosing what you want most over what you want now. Let me say that again. Discipline is choosing what you want most over what you want now. Because what you want now is easy, comfort, distraction, avoidance. But what you want most, that requires consistency. That requires showing up when it's inconvenient. That requires doing the work when no one is watching. And here's the paradox. The more disciplined you become, the more freedom you experience. Freedom from regret, freedom from guilt. Freedom from the constant cycle of starting and stopping. Because you no longer negotiate with yourself. You decide and then you execute. Which leads to the fourth lesson. Your feelings are not your boss. This one is where most people lose. Because we've built a culture around feeling. If I feel motivated, I'll do it. If I feel confident, I'll try. If I feel ready, I'll start. But feelings are inconsistent. They change. They fluctuate. They lie. Consistency requires something deeper. It requires commitment. Commitment doesn't care how you feel. Commitment says, this is who I am now. And once you make that shift from feeling-based action to identity-based action, everything changes. You stop asking, do I feel like doing this? And you start saying, this is what I do. You show up tired. You show up frustrated. You show up uncertain. But you show up. And over time, that becomes who you are. Not someone who tries, but someone who executes. And finally, the fifth lesson. This is the one that most people resist the most. Consistency is built in silence. We live in a world that celebrates results. The highlight reels, the big wins, the overnight success stories. But what you don't see is the quiet, the repetition, the days where nothing seems to change, the days where progress feels invisible. That's where consistency is forged. In the silence, in the moments where no one is clapping, no one is watching, no one even knows what you're doing, and you keep going anyway because you've made a decision. Not for applause, not for validation, but because this is who you've decided to become. Dangerous consistency is not loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't need attention. It's built in the dark and revealed in the light. So let me ask you something. What would happen if you actually committed? Not halfway, not when it's convenient, but fully. What would happen if you stopped negotiating with yourself? If you stopped waiting for the perfect moment? If you stopped letting your feelings dictate your actions? What would your life look like a year from now? Because here's the truth. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not talent. It's not luck. It's not opportunity. It's consistency. And consistency is not something you find. It's something you build. One decision at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time. So when you leave here today, don't look for motivation. It won't last. Don't look for inspiration. It will fade. Make a decision instead. A real one. The kind that doesn't depend on how you feel tomorrow morning. Decide who you are. And then prove it every single day. Because in the end, it's not what you say. It's not what you plan. It's not even what you want. It's what you do consistently when no one is watching. That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes you unstoppable. And that's what will change everything. Self-mastery is louder than self-promotion. The strongest message you can send to the world is not what you say, but who you become. And long-term consistency requires learning how to recover quickly, not being perfect. Because here's where most people misunderstand the entire game. They think consistency means never missing. They think discipline means flawless execution. They think progress is a straight line. And the moment they slip, they think they've failed. But consistency was never about perfection. It was never about getting it right every single time. It was about what you do after you get it wrong. Because you will get it wrong. You will miss days. You will break routines. You will fall short of your own expectations. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And in those moments, something very subtle happens. A decision, not a loud one. Not a dramatic one, a quiet one. A decision about what that mistake means. For most people, that mistake becomes an identity. I'm not disciplined. I always mess things up. I knew I couldn't do this. And just like that, one missed day turns into a missed week. A missed week turns into a lost month. And eventually a pattern. Not because they lacked ability, but because they didn't recover. Recovery is the difference. Not intensity, not talent, not even motivation. Recovery. The speed at which you return to your standard after you fall below it. That's what defines long-term consistency, and here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't struggle with discipline, they struggle with shame. Because when they break their streak, they don't just see a mistake. They see proof. Proof that they're not who they thought they were. Proof that they can't be consistent. Proof that this is just another thing they'll start and abandon. So instead of recovering, they avoid, they delay, they tell themselves they'll restart on Monday, or next month, or when life feels easier. But consistency doesn't break in the moment you fail. It breaks in the moment you hesitate to return. Because every hour you spend overthinking the mistake is an hour you're not rebuilding the habit. And the longer you stay away, the heavier it feels to come back. That's why recovery has to be immediate. Not perfect, immediate. You miss one day. You show up the next, not with guilt, not with punishment, but with clarity. Because the goal is not to avoid falling. The goal is to reduce the time you stay down. Think about that. What if consistency wasn't measured by how long you go without failing, but by how quickly you bounce back after you do? What would change? Everything, because now failure is no longer the enemy. Delay is. Now the mistake doesn't define you, your response does. Now consistency becomes flexible, but unbreakable. You bend, but you don't snap. And that's where self-mastery begins. Not in controlling every action perfectly, but in controlling your reaction when things don't go perfectly. Because that's the moment that tests you. Not the easy days. Not the days when everything aligns. The hard days, the messy days, the days when you don't feel like yourself. That's where your identity is revealed. And if you're honest, most people abandon themselves in those moments. They treat one mistake like a reason to disappear. They withdraw, they disconnect. They step away from the very things that could pull them back. But self-mastery doesn't disappear when things go wrong. It shows up even stronger. It says, yes, I slipped, but I'm still here. It doesn't dramatize the mistake. It doesn't turn it into a story. It treats it as data information, feedback, nothing more. And that's a shift most people never make. They personalize everything. Every failure becomes emotional. Every setback becomes a reflection of their worth. But the moment you stop making it personal, you become dangerous. Because now nothing can stop you for long. You adapt. You adjust. You continue. You don't waste energy on self-judgment. You invest it in forward motion. And that changes the entire trajectory of your life. Because consistency is not built by those who never fall. It's built by those who refuse to stay down. And here's something else most people won't tell you. The longer you try to be perfect, the more fragile you become. Because perfection creates pressure. It creates this illusion that you have to maintain a flawless streak. And the moment that streak breaks, everything feels like it's collapsing. So what do? You quit. Not because you can't continue, but because continuing feels like starting over. And your mind resists that. It tells you, what's the point now? But that's the lie. You're never starting over. You're starting from experience, from awareness, from growth. Every time you return, you're stronger than before. But only if you return quickly. That's the key: speed. Not in execution, in recovery. Because delay is where consistency dies, not failure. Delay. The longer you wait to get back on track, the more resistance builds. The more excuses appear, the more distant your goal feels. Until eventually, it doesn't feel like your goal anymore. It feels like something you used to care about, and that's how people slowly disconnect from their own potential. Not through dramatic failure, but through slow, repeated delays. So if you want to become consistent in a way that's unbreakable, you need to redefine the rules. You need to stop asking, how do I avoid mistakes? And start asking, how do I return faster? Because that question leads to a completely different way of operating. Now you prepare for imperfection, you expect it, you build systems around it, you remove the emotional weight from it. And suddenly mistakes lose their power. They become part of the process, not interruptions to it. And this is where most people start to feel uncomfortable, because it removes the drama. It removes the excuse. It removes the identity of being someone who tries. Now you're someone who executes regardless. And that level of responsibility is heavy, but it's also freeing. Because now nothing owns you, not your past, not your mistakes, not even your bad days. You experience them, but you don't become them. And that's the difference. That's what separates people who stay stuck from people who keep evolving. One group waits to feel ready again. The other decides they already are. One group sees failure as a wall. The other sees it as a step. And over time, those small differences compound. They create completely different lives. Because consistency is not a single act, it's a pattern, a rhythm, a way of being. And that rhythm is not broken by a missed step. It's broken by stopping the music. So keep moving even if it's slow, even if it's imperfect, even if it feels insignificant. Because what matters is not how clean your path looks. What matters is that you stay on it. And staying on it doesn't mean never stepping off. It means always stepping back on. Again, and again, and again, until it becomes automatic, until recovery becomes your default, until returning feels easier than quitting. And that's when something powerful happens. You stop fearing failure because you know it won't last. You stop doubting yourself because you've proven you can come back. You stop relying on motivation because your identity carries you forward. And that point, consistency is no longer something you chase. It's something you embody. It becomes part of how you think, how you act, how you respond. It becomes who you are. And when that happens, the world notices, not because you told them, not because you announced it, but because it's visible in your actions, in your standards, in the way you carry yourself. Self-mastery doesn't need to speak. It shows. It reveals itself over time, quietly, powerfully, and undeniably. Because while others are starting and stopping, you're continuing. While others are waiting for the right moment, you're creating momentum. While others are trying to be perfect, you're learning how to recover faster, stronger, smarter, every single time. And that's what makes you consistent in a way that cannot be broken. Not because you never fall, but because you never stay down long enough for it to matter.